everyone. Welcome to another episode 108. We're talking about shooting with emotion. This week's challenge, if you're watching this live, is Trapped, but I think it was a good opportunity in general to do a bit of a deep dive into how to shoot for emotion, specifically posing your subjects, your angle of shooting, your composition in general, and your lighting. I'm not even going to really talk about the emotion, which is the obvious of your subject's face. I do think it's actually less important. I'm talking about the general feeling that the viewer will get when looking at a shot. And I think it's good to do this kind of reverse engineering in general. If you're watching a movie, or if there's a movie that you really enjoy, you can actually pause and look back at certain scenes and kind of get into the mind of the cinematographer, the director of photography. What did he or she have in mind when setting up a shot in a very specific way? Because it's always very intentional, and it's meant to drive an emotion. And it's not always what the music is telling you or what the actor is telling you. Sometimes it's just the dramatic angle of the camera that's giving you a feeling regardless of what's happening on scene, which could be a cue into what's coming up, or what's coming up in the arc of the story. That's, I think, an aside, but I think a very interesting practice, and maybe that could be a Rails episode unto itself. So let's get started. All of these photos are from this great site called Unsplash, which just gives you licensed, free, copyright-free photos from photographers that contribute towards it. I'm happy to share all of these photos with you. So in case I forget, remind me. I'll share a Dropbox somewhere somewhere connected to this video, maybe in the YouTube description. So I think at first I searched Trapped because that was kind of the guiding factor to start this Rails episode. And I think this is the most obvious representation of Trapped. And it's not just because it's somebody drowning or even that it's water. That's not my point. My point is I want you to squint. I want you to really squint your eyes. There's a few things that we're seeing. We're seeing dramatic lighting, right? So especially when you squint, you see most of the frame on the bottom and on the top is quite dark. There's only a singular point of light, really, that we're looking at as far as our subject is concerned. The second, it's not quite an overhead, but we are seeing depth, right? We are seeing an expanse, and that we're going to get into as we go, which also ticks the emotion of vulnerability, loneliness, that kind of emotions. And thirdly is just general negative space. So we have depth, we have negative space, and we have dramatic lighting. I'm going to go through these, and we're going to kind of, talk about each one. And some may contradict each other, and hopefully there's some clarity when we get to the end. There's a lot of photos here. But again, the focus that I want to give over here is the angle of composition, the type of posing, the type of lighting, and general negative space. Those are the things to keep in mind. Here, I think, are some other really good Trapped examples, but not necessarily because of the obvious. I know this is like an obviously Trapped. She's looking through the window, but more, again, squint your eyes. We're ticking a few boxes here. And I think the dramatic lighting, specifically with black and white, but the dramatic lighting where we have a lot of dark areas in the frame and only really a singular focus of light on our subject, it automatically gives this feeling of loss, of helplessness, of loneliness, of being trapped, right? Imagine, if you will, if this interior was completely lit, right? That would have a whole different feel, let alone if we could see out the window and we see like green, luscious mountains in a sunny day. We're not seeing a lot And that's part of that feeling of trapped that gives an emotion. By design, there is so much that we're not seeing, which is, often what I rail against, if you will, in my critiques, is often the shadows. The details are lost in the shadows. I say, show us some of the shadows. Now, if your intention is something like this, where you want the viewer to feel lost, like they can't see everything, well, that is automatically going to give a certain emotion. I'll skip ahead to this photo. Again, even without her facial expression, what I'm focusing on here is just the lighting, just the dramatic lighting and the negative space around her. Again, imagine if this interior was well lit. What would that look like? No, she would still maybe be in a bad mood, but it wouldn't be as severe. It wouldn't give you this feeling of kind of intense loneliness and lost, right? Kind of lost in the dark. And that'll cue me into just posing in general, which I've seen in a few of these that makes such a dramatic difference. Anytime your subject is closed, right? Holding, kind of hugging yourself, holding an arm, arms to the side, arm on a shoulder, arm in your hair, hand in your hair. That is, again, it's a feeling of being internal and closed and vulnerable, not from a place of, feeling confident and powerful. I touched on it here about, overhead and showing depth, but when you're shooting from above, to give an extreme example, when your angle is a little bit above, looking down, that's going to give a sense of loneliness, of vulnerability, right? Even this one, let's look at this one for a moment. Doesn't look so sad, but this is ticking off a lot of the boxes of feeling small in the world, of feeling vulnerable and lonely. And perhaps if we squinted our eyes, or if this was black and white, a little bit more broody, I think it would drive that emotion home. The next thing I want to focus on here, we see three silhouetted. Again, you're small. The person is small in the frame. Okay, we'll go back to our first example here, just showing an expanse, right? This is all to drive the point home of feeling small and vulnerable and lonely and lost and trapped. Sorry, this is so negative. We will get to super happy photos soon, okay? We will get to it soon. So that also pairs with negative space, right? I think especially these are really clear negative space. There's nothing going on around the subject. It's just one thing that you're seeing. And even here, because they're silhouetted, there is stuff going on, but I think it's pretty clear that you're just looking at that small subject in a very large frame. Here too, I think this ticks the box of shooting slightly overhead. She is low to the ground, and having that dramatic lighting and having that negative space around. There is stuff going on here in the frame. There's a tree and a wall and patterns on the floor. This isn't a very clear negative space image, but I think because it's black and white, again, squint your eyes. That is what your subconscious sees, right? We're seeing a whole lot of dark and then just kind of a spotlight of light. And that will just evoke an emotion. She could be checking her email. What is she doing here? She probably is checking her email. Is that a phone? She's just trying to see her email in the sun. And that's interesting, that she's probably fine. She's on vacation. She's checking her email. But her whole body is internal, right? Her limbs are folded. The pose is very internal. She's not she's not open. She's not, we'll look at some of the examples soon of poses where you're just completely open, and coupled with, the dark negative space around her and shot from overhead, that is going to give you the feeling of loneliness, even though she's checking her email. Here's a pretty obvious example of that. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit, okay? Shooting from below. What emotion does this generally evoke, and I say this with super generalizations because you can shoot from below and be sad, you could shoot from above and be happy. We're going to give a test at the end. I'm not really sure where we're switching to the test, but at some point I'm still going to start asking you what you think, and it's going to be confusing. And I think these are all good things to keep in mind. When you're shooting low, you're generally going to give this feeling of heroic, of larger than life, confidence. It's the superhero angle. It's when Superman lands on the ground and the camera's on the floor. For those types of angles, you look larger than life, even if you're, let's say, not a very tall person, not a very big person. You shoot low like this, and suddenly you are looking grand and confident. Here's an interesting one because she doesn't particularly look happy, but I don't think it gives the same sense of vulnerability and loneliness because we're shooting low, even though her limbs are a little bit folded. But I wouldn't, you look at these. She could very well be happy, and she could very well be happy. She could very well be sad. But I think the lighting and the angle completely changes the emotion for the viewer upon first inspection, which is what I'm talking about. Upon your first impression of what your subconscious is being delivered. Okay, this is an interesting one because we have a bit of a closed body pose. We have a bit of dramatic lighting, negative space, all the things I talked about, except for the angle. The angle is not overhead, but the angle is a bit lower. And look at how much that changes. We'll look maybe here. These are quite similar. Ignore the fact that she's crying. I mean, that's pretty obvious. There's a tear. My point in picking this one out is simply the lighting, right? Her hand is on her shoulder. And here it's just shot a little bit lower. And I think that gives a little bit of almost a sense of hope, right? She could be hopeful just from the angle. Things to keep in mind, right? You shoot low, there's a little bit of hope, confidence, grandeur, and optimism. Shoot from above, hey, these people aren't sad, but this is actually ticking all the boxes I just mentioned. The photographer is shooting from above. This is super dramatic lighting. There's a lot of space that we see, even though there's like some clutter. We'll call it negative space. There's space around the subject. Well, he's not too happy, but she's giving a smile. But I want to tell you that this scene is sad. This is not a happy scene, right? Let's skip forward for a second because there's a similar one here. Okay, kind of similar vibe. People at a table. Now, forget the fact that they're obviously laughing and they're maybe less obviously, I don't know, crying inside. But look at the angle and the lighting. Right? Forget even the pose and the emotion on the person's face. I'm not even talking about that. Just the angle and the lighting. Shot from above, dramatic lighting, sad. Shot from below, let's call it well lit, happy. So when you have something in between, it could get confusing. Here, let me skip forward to this is going to be one of the test photos. But this is an interesting one, right? Is this a happy photo or a sad photo? Well, it's pretty obvious that it's a happy photo, but what the photographer is doing is kind of perhaps unintentionally ticking all these sad boxes, shooting from above, a lot of negative space, mostly dark, one spotlight, closed body pose. If she wasn't smiling, think about how this frame would look. So I don't know if this is really the best composition to show off someone that is super happy. I mean, she looks happy, but you could shoot it from below and it would be a bit better. It's still like you're still fighting a whole lot of kind of sad elements there, but it would have been better. Okay, let's go into body pose for a moment and happy stuff. I mean, when I was talking about the body being closed, where did I talk about that here? It's a little bit closed here, even though she's checking her email. Body is super closed. Anytime again, hugging yourself, hugging an arm. It's this sense of, not being confident, feeling vulnerable, as opposed to you're out, you're having fun, your arms are in the air. Now suddenly we're well lit, even though we're showing, this is a wide angle from above, so that's, on the on the negative checklist, if you will. We have not dramatic lighting, we have beautiful lighting, and we have a beautiful body pose where we're just feeling on top of the world, right? Shot from below, even better. Shot from below, expansive, nice light. I'm not even talking about whether they're smiling. I'm saying even if you just squinted your eyes and you couldn't really see their face, this is now a happy shot. Arms out. I'm open to the world, right? I'm open. Let me in. Ready to experience. And it's interesting because a shot like this, could have been sad, right? If it was a little bit darker and her arms were in, then that changes the vibe completely. Didn't we have a similar, maybe this is like a little bit similar, although I didn't think that was too sad. But you get the point. Okay, what do you feel about this one? Maybe this will start the testing. Now it's up to you guys. What do you feel about this one? Well, it's not super dramatic, right? It's well lit, but her pose is very vulnerable, right? She's just holding her arm. So this is kind of in the middle, but I would say it's not a happy shot. And this one's interesting because here we have, so similar to this one that we just saw here. It's like very similar vibe. Sun is out, beautiful golden hour, nice scene, kind of shot from above. So the point here is just the touching of the hair, just the not being super open. We don't know. Maybe she's pensive. Maybe she's chilling, but it's not super clear because the body pose is saying otherwise. The body pose is saying I'm a little bit uncomfortable. If she was throwing her hair back, that's more open, right? And maybe that happened like a second later or a second earlier. But right now, what we're seeing is a little bit pensive, I would say. What about this? Is this a happy shot or a sad shot? Well, the body pose is not open, but we're not quite seeing like an expansive. He doesn't seem lost because we're not seeing an expansive view. And it's shot from below, so that's also, I wouldn't say he's vulnerable or lost. But because of the body pose, I would maybe say somewhere in the middle. So maybe he's thinking, introspective. Maybe he's hopeful. I think this is more open to the viewer's interpretation because there's a lot of things being mixed. Not super clear. It's not dramatic in any way, I think. So, that's interesting. What about this? Is happy or sad? Well, I think this like ticks all the sad boxes, right? Shot from above, feeling of loneliness, a lot of empty space, negative space, dramatic lighting. That's sad. How about this one? Right? She seems happy. She doesn't seem particularly sad. She's got a Hello Kitty jacket on. She seems to have a bit of a smirk. But that's not my point. The emotion given over by the framing is what I'm talking about. By the posing, by the lighting, all of that says negative. So she may be happy. I'm not saying that forces the subject to be sad. I'm saying it's shot in a way to evoke a certain sense of vulnerability in the viewer that's watching. We can't help but feel that this woman or this girl is maybe a little lost, or maybe she's happy, but there's some feeling inside of us that's just seeing this emotion of lost, vulnerability. Let me just bring up this other girl, right? I mean, look at the difference. They could both be as happy, right? But this shot is shot from below, superhero angle all the way, well lit, and without the dramatic lighting. So just angle. Angle does so much. Like I said here, angle does so much. This is so subtle, just so subtly lower. But even though everything else is ticked, I wouldn't write it off as a automatic, sad photo, if you will. How about this guy? Is he happy or sad? Well, we can't really tell. But what we can tell is this feeling of being small, right? So that's not maybe necessarily a bad thing. Again, like there's definitely a feeling of being small in these photos, but the poses say bring it on, right? Here he's not quite posing that way. He does seem interested in looking at the rock, perhaps. So I would say, undefined, or maybe he's just being hopeful or pensive or thinking aloud. And we'll round out the last three. Wow, that was a fast 20 minutes. We'll round out the last three. These are interesting because these are all moody black and white portraits. Let's see. We'll start with this one. Shot from above. What do you guys think? Like at first you're like, oh, it's cool. It's like a kind of a broody, cool model shot, right? Model portrait. But then just looking, inspecting through the lens of what we've just learned, it's shot from above. It is very moody lighting, and her body pose is kind of like touching her hair, perhaps pensive. She's also exposing her neck, and that could be a sense of vulnerability as well. So I would say pensive. I would say this gives you the feeling, this doesn't give you a confident feeling. That's to me. Maybe you see something else, and maybe this is, a bit more of a borderline, but I would say this ticks all those boxes of feeling a little bit pensive or lost. How about this? She's also kind of exposing her neck. Same broody lighting, but what do you think? I think her body language is a little bit more open, as opposed to here we see like her hands on her head. Here we see it's a little bit more open, almost, in the sense of hopeful, looking up. So I think body pose would win, at least the way I see it. And all of these that I'm showing you now were, not very clear. They were all kind of borderline. I'm trying to mess with you in a way to get you thinking about the importance, the ratio, if you will, of importance to angle and lighting and, posing. And I think the actual emotion, like the actual, whether you're smiling or laughing or sad or whatever, that's last, I would say, on this list. And here, finally, also like very broody, very dramatic lighting, almost just a harsh spot. Slightly shot from below. We do have the hand, under the chin, but I wouldn't, that's not a closed pose. I think that's a pretty neutral pose, a pretty popular model pose. And I think it's slightly shot from below enough that to me, she looks hopeful. Again, no semblance of a smile. She doesn't seem happy or sad. I think this is a really good example. Just angle. I think the angle wins this one of how we feel in that balance upon looking at it. So, that I thought I would maybe be able to do that quicker, but this is just so super important. And I'm going to recap quickly, just general, like, negative space and space around your subject will make them feel small, will make them feel lost. Whether it's actual space or it's space created by light, anything dark, anything the viewer cannot see makes the subject automatically feel small, right? Which automatically often will make them feel trapped as well. Any kind of closed pose is going to make the subject, again, feel a bit vulnerable and lost. Negative space around the subject, an expansive view, especially when shot from above, will give this same feeling as well. Shot from below is the opposite. That gives hope, confidence, and feelings of grandeur, okay? Try not to mix these two because you're going to confuse the emotions of the audience unless that is your intention. Arms out, sunny days. This will give you a happy vibe. Shot from below, again, this will make a dramatic difference. Sorry, my alarm keeps going off, but it's actually bird singing, so that makes sense. If you're shooting somewhere in the middle, like you're trying to shoot something that you feel is confident or strong, but then you're shooting it, let's say, with very dramatic lighting and overhead, it's just a little bit of a mix of emotion. Again, none of this is good or bad. This is just, driving some points home of how much it comes into play, the angle of your composition and the lighting of your composition. I mean, it's just everything. And these were some, again, examples, maybe borderline. I think body pose has a lot to do with this, but again, I think it's angle. The camera is just above her head over here, and the camera is just below her chin over here. And for here, it just something seems a little bit lost, like she seems a little bit distant. And here, she just seems powerful. She seems powerful and hopeful because we're looking down at the camera slightly. So that was your crash course into shooting with emotion, understanding how much light, angle, composition, negative space, and body posing affects the emotion in your images and how to properly use it to get the story that you want delivered clearly over to the viewer. Hope you enjoyed this one. This was Off the Rails 108. Thanks so much to you all for the continued support. I'll see you all next week. Happy shooting.